Pacific time. My name is John Fisher, and I am part of the School Garden Support Organization-Network. And today we're going to be speaking about educational gardens and how they support food relief during COVID-19. So we have some co-presenters that are going to be sharing their stories. We have a Q&A session, and we will have an opportunity for audience members to share out how they're doing this work as well. So just a little bit of housekeeping. There will be an archive of this presentation, and the Q&A tool that we use will all be on the sgsonetwork.org/webinars page. It'll also be emailed to you tomorrow. Throughout the presentation, you can use the chat. Do not use the Q&A function. We find that to be cumbersome in Zoom webinars. So use the chat if you have any specific questions. But most of the questions that you posed in the registration process are all similar questions, and we kind of group those into categories, and we will, as a group, answer those. And then, as a reminder, we do have a feedback survey. We appreciate your feedback, and when the webinar ends, you will be directed to that short survey to tell us how it went. So here's our agenda. We'll go to 12 or 12:15 Pacific time, talk a little bit about the School Garden Support Organization Network resources. We'll go into our case studies, and then we'll do Q&A, and then you'll do your post-survey. Pretty simple agenda. So who are we? The School Garden Support Organization Network is a learning community of school garden support professionals. We're all different types of organization types, whether you're a government, nonprofit, school, university, philanthropy organization. We find lots of different organizations have an interest in supporting school gardens, and we like to come together to share resources and ideas, because many of us are operating kind of independently in our own communities. We share via webinars, which we're doing a lot of these days, surprisingly, or not surprisingly. We do in-person gatherings, or we will be doing more in-person gatherings as the time comes. And then we have some great web resources. One resource that's been active for the last 7 years is our online forum. It's a Google group, and there are lots of discussion threads there. You can pose your questions and search our forum. And we have COVID-specific topics. We also have an email list that you can find at the sgsonetwork.org/connect page. And that is pretty much announcements of our webinars and when we have face-to-face gatherings. This is what we've done this fall. All of these are archived on our webinars page. And the one that's highlighted is very relevant to what we're talking about today. Many of you asked about how to do safe handling of produce and distribution and how to access gardens safely. We've had a webinar in the fall on that. We also had a webinar in the spring on that. The fall one is better because everybody had a little more time to figure their things out than in the spring when it was just thrown upon us that we're all going into COVID protocols. So I encourage you to check out that webinar, and specifically another resource that we have on our website that's shared in that webinar is what's highlighted here. It's the Garden Care and Access resource. What this is a peer-to-peer user-generated collection of content from other SGSOs related to caring for your gardens and harvesting. So there's a name and description of the resource, there's a link, and then there's a way to categorize what are these particular resources related to. So for example, in that right-hand column, you can see people have information on, protocol or sample signage related to harvest, handling, and distribution of food. So you can go and check out these resources. There's a lot there, so I do want to point you in the direction of one of the most relevant resources from the University of Minnesota. They have a guide to guide you on how to create your own template or your own protocol for accessing community gardens, which are very similar to school gardens. Probably many of you already have these protocols set up, but even more specific to today's topic, many of you asked questions about the safety related to harvesting produce during these times. And they have a whole FAQ that's based by university research about the safety and the precautions you need to take when you're handling fruits and vegetables. In summary, I could tell you from looking at it, it's very basic, face coverings, distance, wash your hands, sanitize tools, sanitize common touch spaces. So I think we're all very practiced on these. So, that FAQ on handling produce is very similar to what we recognize is happening in grocery stores, right? So there's distancing, there's separation, there's, if you're doing a farmer's market style, you might have a screen or a plexiglass screen. It's hand washing and sanitizing shared items. So just reiterating what is there. So if you don't have the time to go check out that resource, know that it's there. So we are going to now transition to having our partners and co-presenters share out. And the first organization will be folks from Jones Valley Teaching Farm, and then we'll hear from Grow Pittsburgh, and then we'll hear from Onalaska School District. So Jerome and Nicole, take it away.
Thanks, John.
Greetings, everyone. My name is Jerome Wiggins. I am the Director of Educational Programs and Partnerships at Jones Valley Teaching Farm. Nicole?
And I'm Nicole Carpenter. I'm the Director of Development at Jones Valley Teaching Farm. And as John mentioned, we're located in the city of Birmingham, Alabama. Don,
Nicole,
will you advance?
If my screen if I start sounding like a robot, just give me a hand and I'll turn my video off. So bear with me.
I will.
Okay. So Jones Valley Teaching Farm, located in Birmingham, Alabama. We're a local nonprofit, strategically working with our local school system, Birmingham City Schools. So what do we do at Jones Valley Teaching Farm? First of all, as the first line says, food is our foundation. People grow here. We use food as a foundation for learning. So through the power of growing food, as the slide says, JVTF, Jones Valley Teaching Farm, we create opportunities for academic exploration, right? So what I like to tell my family and my friends when they ask about Jones Valley Teaching Farm, I always say that we are an organization that uses food as a foundation, and we help kids think outside of the box so they can reach and master the same exact standards that they're required to meet in the classroom. We assist and collaborate with teachers so they can get that same knowledge through food, through culinary arts, through all things farming on our teaching farms, which in the next slide, John, you'll be able to see pictures of our 7 teaching sites, again, that are located strategically in our local school system, which is Birmingham City School System. And Nicole, if you have anything to say, just cut me off, throw your hand up, and we'll tag team. So as you see on this screen, you have 4 of the 7 teaching farms. In the top right, you have our downtown campus, which is a 4-acre plot. It is tied to one of the local schools that you can see in the background, which is Phillips Academy. This is our hub. This is where everything started, and this is our biggest production site. The other 3 sites are all located in one feeder pattern. Of course, there are 2 other schools in this feeder pattern, but these are the 3 elementary sites, which top right is Glen Elementary, which is special and is near and dear to our hearts because Glen was our first teaching farm. We were provided an opportunity to dive into this teaching space and build out this extravagant farm and just hit the ground running and give our whole model a try. Well, once we saw how successful this could be, we came up with the idea that if we can implement this in one school and make it be successful, why not try to expand throughout an entire feeder pattern, which is where the other sites that you'll see come into effect, which bottom left, you have Oliver Elementary, bottom right, you have Avondale Elementary. And if you notice, all of the sites besides the top left-hand corner, all of them have very similar characteristics. Most have raised beds. They all have ponds. They all have teaching areas, shaded teaching sites where classes can come out and participate in our standards-based program, Good School Food. Next slide, John. Sound like a game show host when I say that. Okay, so now you have the next 2 schools, which are actually, one of them is the secondary school, W. Putnam Middle School, which I'm very, 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 very close to. I was an administrator at this school for three years. And then you also have on the top right, Hayes K through 8, which is kindergarten through 8th grade. And if you notice the similarities of these sites as compared to the others, they all have, again, raised beds, they all have the walking paths, and they all come with shaded areas. Now, the interesting thing about the Putnam, of course, I love Putnam, right? Because I was there. So if you see Putnam at the top left-hand corner, so one of the big things that we do at Jones Valley Teaching Farm throughout our pre-K through 12th grade, we like to dive into what we call PBLs, right? Which, for those of you that aren't familiar, PBL is called a project-based learning event or assignment. So the greenhouse, that greenhouse is special to us because through a grant that was written by our team, this PBL project was designed and built out by our students at Putnam. So you have middle school students who designed this entire greenhouse. They actually put their hands in the dirt and assisted with the whole build out. So that's enough about Putnam because I'll be on that all day. At the bottom, we have Woodlawn High School, which Nicole and I and the rest of our team like to call the mecca of our good school food or our whole Jones Valley Teaching Farm student experience. Because as I've said in this quick talk, and I know I don't have much time, we start with kids in pre-K, which are 4-year-olds, and then they have the chance to matriculate on all the way up to our high school. And this is where they end up. At the high school, you have roughly a 1,500 square foot greenhouse. We have storage areas, but the growing area is roughly 2 acres. And it's all ran by students. Of course, they are managed and monitored by us, particularly my senior farm manager, which is Muhammad, who was actually a graduate of Woodlawn High School. So I'm gonna give you something that's really special about this program. Once kids go through the entire program and they become juniors in high school, so the vision of Jones Valley Teaching Farm is eventually for this program to be ran by the very people that we serve, which would be the students, right? So once they go through our good school food program, they get in high school, then they have the opportunity where they can become one of our paid high school apprentices. So we have, and that's thanks to Nicole and her team's hard work for allowing us to continue this. But once they become juniors in high school, they have a chance to become one of our paid high school apprentices, which we have roughly between 8 and 9 a year. So back way back in the day when I was in school, we referred to it as co-oping, right? So basically what you do is if you have the credits and you have the ability, you can basically get out of school and go to work. Well, the unique thing about the high school at Woodlawn is directly behind the high school. I wish it was a panoramic camera and you could turn around. The high school is directly across the street from here. So the kids clock out, they come over and they actually can work around 20 hours a week for 4 to 5 days a week, meaning roughly 4 hours a day. They come over and they do all things farming. We have wraparound services for the students and just everything to build out this extremely positive experience for the students, all while wrapped into the CTE program in our district. So with that being said, they're also getting school credit for coming across and helping us out, basically. Nicole, if I'm talking too fast, you have anything to say, just dive in. John, next slide. There's the game show host again. All right.
Well, quickly, so in addition to the high school apprenticeship, we also have a graduate apprenticeship. So once after graduating from the high school apprenticeship, often our apprentices will go on to a 2-4-year degree, or sometimes they choose to stay with us and pursue a 2-year paid apprenticeship, which is full-time with benefits at a salary that puts them above the average. It's a living wage salary. It puts them above the average salary for that area. And just recently, within the past few years, we have hired 2 graduate apprentices as full-time instructors. So now they are serving as instructors in the elementary and middle schools that they attended and experienced the good school food education model within. So this is really the paradigm shift that Jerome referenced earlier, that as an organization we're trying to make by by equipping and elevating the students that experience good school food to actually then become part of our full-time staff and lead the organization into the future.
I don't know how I forgot to mention the graduate apprenticeship. Nicole, thank you so much. That's part of the vision. Actually, the vision is rolling into place. If you look on this COVID-19 response slide, the young lady to the far right is Chandria Mack. Actually, Chandria and Fernando in the middle, and Muhammad are all, well, two instructors, and Muhammad is the farm manager at Woodlawn. But Chandria Mack on the far right, she is the initial person that's making this dream come true. She started out as a student in this organization, went through, became a high school apprentice. Then she went to college, one of our local colleges, to pursue a culinary degree. But while she was in school, she also was working as a graduate apprentice for us. And then, I mean, we have amazing talent here in Birmingham, Alabama, and we just opened up a spot. And Sean moved right into it. And now she's, along with one of her other former graduate apprentices, are full-time Jones Valley Teaching Farm instructors that work in our partner schools. Chandria was fortunate enough to actually get the position at Putnam Middle School, which you've already heard me say I love Putnam, but she was able to get in Putnam Middle School where she actually was a student. So she's now working in a school that she attended with, believe it or not, teachers that taught her. So the dream is actually happening. It's the vision of our executive director, Amanda Story. Now, I think, Nicole, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think 30% of our staff is now Woodlawn High School graduates. And it's increasing every year we just brought on 5 new high school apprentices, and actually brought on 2 other graduate apprentices. Well, there's one now, we're working on the second one. And the numbers are growing. So anyway, don't let me get on that. That's my soapbox. We love it. I'll talk about it all day. But I know, John, we have to talk about the COVID-19 response. So as you all know, in March of this past year, a weird thing happened to the world of education specifically. COVID-19 hit the education world hard, and we all had to pivot immediately. So for Jones Valley Teaching Farm, our response was, first of all, through our strong partnerships with our local district, we were able to pivot like a lot of other nonprofits working in education worlds could not. So we immediately transitioned our entire team. That was from the executive director all the way down to me. I'm on the bottom of the totem pole. Everybody, we just transitioned to something different. We turned our teaching sites, of course, because, you know, students could not be in the buildings, students could not be on the sites, but because of the food shortages and the food disparities in our local communities, we were able to turn all of our teaching sites into production sites where we ramped up our production. We continued to do the farming. Everybody, even the desk people like me and the school people, we all had to get in the dirt to make this happen so we could distribute food to our local community. Now, could we just turn our backs on the education piece? Absolutely not. So it was a transition where we had to adapt at the drop of a dime. So while we were in the process of ramping up our production and distributing this food to our communities and our community partners, we also had to figure out how to remain relevant in our school system. So what we did was we came up with the bright idea, thanks to our educational programs manager, Leah Hillman. We transitioned, basically we used our summer program as a model, an example, almost like a guinea pig to start out just to see if we could make this work. So we run a summer camp called Camp Grow, where normally we would be on our 2-acre Woodland High School site with about 20 to 25 students, rising secondary students, so it would be rising 6th grade through 9th grade, where they would come on and do our summer program, Camp Grow, which it is wrapped around all things culinary, right? We partner with all of our, well, not all of our, but several of our local chefs or restaurant partners, and we teach them all things about how to grow and how to sustain their own foods and how to also use those things in this healthy living format and prepare it. Then we also took them on field trips where they could go and see these actual things in process in various restaurants around the city. Well, of course, with COVID, we couldn't do that. So what we did was we turned it into a virtual experience with really about, this time it was about what, Nicole, maybe about 30 kids?
Yeah, in 2 different communities, West and East Birmingham.
Right.
And we brought the summer camp to them. So we brought the education in small groups via Zoom. So they were paired, a small group of kids were paired with an apprentice, an instructor. And then every week they received a delivery of all of the culinary and growing supplies that they would need that week for instruction. So we were dropping off buckets and dirt and seedlings, and then partnered with a local grocery distributor here to give them all of the dry goods, and then we're bringing them produce from our farms. And so they were growing and cooking food that they needed. And it was fascinating to watch because it really became an entire family engagement activity. So one kid would be signed up as a student, but I think 50% of the screens drone had more than one kid in it. It was like, come here, sister, like do this with me. And just fascinating, like our evaluation, all the students said that they got to know their instructors. They felt like they got to know the other students. We had one family where the two main guardians of the family contracted COVID about halfway throughout camp. And at the end of the camp, the mom wrote us and said, I don't know what I would have done without this camp. My son, who was a camper, ended up cooking for our entire family because I and my sister couldn't. And he did it with joy and with confidence. And like, thank you. And I mean, that's, I think, for us was a turning point of like, wow, this pilot works a lot better than, I think we were expecting. And there's something to this sort of hybrid of the virtual education, but pairing it also with, bringing the supplies at home and allowing kids to build their own gardens at home. And you would drive by to do these deliveries, and you knew which homes in the neighborhood were Camp Grow homes because they had these massive pots on their porches with plants growing in them. So it was a huge, it was a success, and Drone's team's taking that to build out what we're doing for this academic year. I'll give it back to you now.
So Ronan and Nicole, you have about 5 more minutes.
Thank you.
5 minutes, that's it, John? Come on.
Yeah.
I'm only kidding.
Yeah.
So we looked at the whole COVID piece. Of course, it turned our world, meaning everything in Jones Valley and outside of Jones Valley, across the nation, across the world, really. It turned everything upside down. But it also taught us some very important lessons. It actually, because of the way we responded with our Camp Grow, like Nicole mentioned, we then transitioned our in-school experience during the school year to a virtual experience. So we're now building out the same lessons that we did in person in previous years. We're now in the process with the young man holding the red flowers in the middle, Fernando, who is a tech whiz. We're now converting those lessons to the same type virtual experience that we did with Camp Grow. And it also is allowing us to leverage our partnerships outside of those 7 schools that we normally work with, because now it's virtual. Now people across the district in schools that we don't necessarily have these extravagant farms built on, they can still get a piece of what we have to offer. And of course, this is at the very beginning of it, and we're figuring it out as we go. But so far, it has been very successful, and we're eagerly looking forward to what's to come. Okay, I don't know what's on the next slide, John, but we'll go for it. Let's go.
I want to play to your game show. Here comes your next slide, Jerome.
So let's see. Okay, so the 2021.
I'm going to interject really quickly. So we, from April through August, as Jerome mentioned, we transitioned our teaching farms to production farms. we grew and distributed over 10,000 pounds of produce to partners throughout Birmingham. We worked with 10 different partners that already served the communities around the schools that we partner with, and worked with them to help distribute our produce to students and families in vulnerable communities, or populations rather, within those communities. And then we also, as I mentioned, we were growing and distributing seedlings, and we distributed over 5,000 seedlings to the community, again, from April through August. And so moving forward now, John.
Oh, I'm sorry. Hey, it's amazing because I forgot what was on this slide, and I think I talked through the slide before I even got to it. So what I will say is everything that Nicole said is absolutely head on. We have really upped our partnerships with our community partners and just people in the community for our students. It's a difficult time here in Birmingham and everywhere, and we're just a small piece of this puzzle, but we're doing everything we can to remain relevant and also to assist anyone that we can assist. So I think this is the last slide. Not sure, John, but let's go. Okay, there we go. We have another one. So Nicole, you want to jump on that one?
Yeah, you touched on this a lot. So just as a reminder, like 25% of Birmingham's under the poverty line. All 6 of our schools are in USDA low income, low access to food tracks, and are Title I schools. So, you know, as I'm sure with a lot of communities, for folks that are on this call, you know, food access is a huge problem, and something that, along with access to strong educational resources, was highlighted because of COVID, and we see as a continuing need within our community. So our focus for the 2020-21 academic year is really continuing to serve our students and our families in that way. So we are focusing on, you know, growing and distributing food, working with the school system to get it directly to students and families, continuing to provide our teachers and our students with those learning resources that reinforce the standards-based lessons that they need to master, and then providing the youth employment opportunities. John, will you advance that, please?
And I will jump into this quickly, Nicole. And then I'll pass it back off to you. And I want everybody to know, like, we were able to do this and continue to do this work because of our strict protocols that we put in place, and we followed them to a T. So we really kept this entire outbreak really under wraps in our organization. Like, we did not have anything to really happen to us that would stop us from doing what we do. With that being said, we do have a lot of protocols, and we can share those with you, John, or whomever else may want to see them. But go ahead. I didn't mean to cut you off, Nicole.
No. Yeah, so these are some of our goals and metrics specifically around food security for this year. But as Jerome said, I mean, we're happy to talk more, I think, through the Q&A about exactly how we did this. But instrumental to it was, you know, having a really strong partnership with the school system, and that level of trust. I think, Jerome, we were the only organization that was allowed on the school sites throughout COVID, not even the teachers, but we were. And then working with, you know, our Jefferson County, which is the county in which we live in, our health department, to make sure that our safety protocols were vetted, and and everything was approved. So I think, John, that's it for us. We're excited to be continuing to see our food used in a different way in this coming school year, and continuing to figure out and build out that kind of hybrid model. And yeah, Jerome, anything else?
I want to thank you guys. It was just a really great example of how the whole program has responded to continue to do what you do, growing food, but then serving the community with that food by shifting. I love how you shifted your model for increased production and, getting that food out to your community. So it was really great stories to hear how this program, someone in the chat said, I've been watching Jones Valley Teaching Farm for a long time. I have too. My friend was one of the founders of it, Edwin Marty. I don't know how old you guys are, 12 years, 15 years or something, but real exciting model to look to. And I do want to let you know, Nicole and Jerome, some people put some really great questions in the chat.
Yeah.
To us as the panelists, if you could respond to those questions to everybody so they can get some of those answers. And as you mentioned, Jerome, sharing your protocol, that could be done in the chat or when we get to our Padlet, our Q&A note-taking tool, we'll get those shared out for folks. So I want to thank you so much. It's a very inspiring program to see how it builds from kids all the way to adults, something we can all aspire to. We're going to transition in Reading Jackson, or Reading, you could tell me how to say your name, is going to share a bit about Grow Pittsburgh. And Reading, if you could share your video, if you're in a position to do that. I'm not sure if you are, but if you are, that helps our participants. Thanks a lot for sharing. And I just want to point out that the way we run these virtual gatherings is, folks just chime up to say, I could share, and a day or two before, I'm like, please share. And, Reading and Jody just stepped up in the last couple of days and said, yeah, I'll share. And Nicole and Jerome were put on the spot to share today because the person from Jones Valley had a family emergency they had to deal with. So we're just about sharing, and we're going to continue to share with Reading, and then we'll follow with Jody, and then we'll get into our Q&A session. Take it away, Reading.
Great. Thank you so much for having me and for that great presentation. It was really great to hear about the different programs you do at Jones Farm. I'm Reading, you're correct, with Grow Pittsburgh. I've been a learning garden educator there for about 4 years now. And Grow Pittsburgh as an organization is very multifaceted. I work in the school gardens department, and we support, I think, about 35 school gardens at this point. It might be 40 because 30 of them are within the public school district of Pittsburgh, which has about 54 schools. And then 10 or so are in surrounding districts that we've partnered with over recent years. And then the other departments that work with Grow Pittsburgh, we do a lot of urban ag support around the community, in the schools and in community gardens. We have a whole team of people working in community gardens, supporting community growers around the city. And they take on new gardens and teach people how to grow if there's a team of people in a neighborhood that are interested in starting gardens. And they've been able to do that successfully this year in response to COVID with different safety practices and measure, and run a community garden. It's a tool lending library we call our Garden Resource Center that community gardeners or home growers can be members of and borrow tools or soil amendments or cover crops, and things like topsoil, mulch, and compost. They get a certain allotment every month. And that's been able to continue to a degree with safety restrictions throughout the season. And our work in the school, this was why I replied to saying that I was interested in sharing today, because we have been able to turn some of our school gardens into production sites for donation, which has been a really wonderful way that our organization has been able to respond to this crisis. We have 2 urban farms attached to the group, and they are in 2 different urban communities. One is 1 acre in a neighborhood called Braddock, and it's called Braddock Farms, and one is Shiloh Farms in Point Breeze, and that's just a 1/3 of an acre city lot. And they've been able to continue their apprenticeship programs and farm stands with safety precautions. And we've also been able to use some of the school gardens. You can advance to the next slide. I don't have a whole presentation, but I did throw in a couple pictures of the gardens that I've been working in this summer. This is Arsenal Middle School in Lawrenceville and Pittsburgh. It's a middle school connected to an elementary school. And this garden is primarily during the year maintained by their life skills support and science classes. In the summer, it's been maintained by myself and a teacher. And we've been able to donate a lot of that food to the students that the teacher works with. and to different food pantries around the community. I believe we have about 12 school gardens total that we've been growing like this. You could go to the next slide. I think I just threw in a picture of some kohlrabi there in the garden. That was looking really cute. So you can see the raised beds are in the background, and that's the program that I primarily work with. And then they had some wooden beds in the front. Oh, how do we donate safely? That's a great question. Do they meet you at the school or do we deliver? So we deliver. So the teachers that I work with are close enough with several of their students and families that some of them, I think there have only been a very small number of people have delivered. There's one school where students have come for meetings with their teachers throughout the year in the region that they've done a safe distribution. And then the pantries, they accept food and they have a whole washing. We harvest it with masks and gloves on and wash it ourselves if people request it. But for the most part, pantries and different schools have washing facilities and want to take care of that. So that is a great question. If you go to the next slide, it's one of the other gardens that we've been maintaining for the summer. And a lot of the produce, oh, that was a picture of my supervisor collecting donations for one of, I don't know what she was collecting donations for, but I liked the pictures of the kale and the collards. And you could go to the next slide. And this is one of the gardens that's been harvested mostly by neighbors. There's a street right behind the school. There's a field between the houses and the garden, but a lot of the people use the field for exercising when I'm there, which is really nice. And now the neighbors know enough about it that they could come down and harvest themselves. And I've talked to them about safety precautions when they go down there. Whenever I go down, I wipe down any surface that I use and sanitize hands a lot if I'm not using gloves. And I think that about covers bulk of the things that we've been doing within our school gardens department. We're still supporting teachers in virtual lessons. And we're doing a webinar on October 13th. I know it's the 14th, that Wednesday, October 14th, about how to connect your virtual learning lessons to the garden and outdoor experiences. Because there are a lot of ways, I'm sure a number of people here have been figuring out different ways. We still had a summer, it's like a youth high school apprenticeship program at Braddock Farms. And it's usually in another neighborhood. There are two with a handful of teenagers each summer, and they get paid to learn about gardening and do hands-on work on the farms. And one of them had to be canceled because of COVID, but then the other one we were able to do a little bit outside, and a lot of it ended up being remote lessons, which was still really, it felt really, the students really enjoyed it. It was really fun to teach, surprisingly. I felt engaged. It felt like students were engaged. We got to make things and deliver supplies that we sanitized and dropped off at a meeting point for the entire Braddock Youth Project. And their teams would come, their team leaders would come and give them supplies at their houses. So yeah, the virtual learning connection has been an interesting bridge to cross, but it's been surprisingly rewarding and fun, more engaging than I had thought it would be from the start. So I think that's all I have. If there are any questions, feel free to ask any questions and I can pass it along to the next presenter.
Great, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Ready? And yeah, put your questions in the chat, and I see some specific ones to Ready that she can answer. And know that after Jody speaks, we're gonna have a group note-taking and then open up the mics to everybody to share some dialogue related to some of the solutions we're looking to create. So Jody from Onalaska School District, she's a garden coordinator, is gonna talk. And Jody, I'm interested where Onalaska, if you know where the name came from. I'm just curious. I've never heard of Onalaska. I know you're a smaller community in Wisconsin, but that would be a question I'd chat in. But since I have the mic, I'm asking you right now. But take it away, Jody.
John, I don't know the answer to that question. I'm so sorry. Is my video on, John? I don't see myself there.
You are looking great. I see you and hear you.
Okay. Okay, sounds good. Okay, I'm sorry, I don't know the answer to that question. I should know a lot of town names in Wisconsin are named after Native American tribes, and I'm guessing that, but I could be wrong. So I'm actually native to Minnesota. Well, actually I grew up in, for a while in California and then Minnesota. So don't know the answer to that, but I feel I'm really impressed with all of these school gardens that I've been seeing in these previous slides. It's just amazing. I feel like I'm representing small town, homespun, more not rural life, but we're a little bit smaller over here. The population of Onalaska is about 18,000. Our district has 1 high school, 1 middle school, and 3 elementary schools. And I've been garden coordinator for 10 years. We started through farm to school funding. And we started out with just elementary school gardens, with outdoor gardens. We live in zone 4, so we use season extenders like cold frames and seed starting to grow lettuce, radishes, and spinach that in a way that supports existing science program. And then we are able to do sampling in the cafeteria. Kids eat all the food, so we're able to grow it in time for kids to sample. Then we have a summer program where families come and they work independently to harvest and maintain the gardens over the summer. And then after a few years, we expanded to the middle school. We have an outdoor garden there as well. A few years into being garden coordinator, we started out with tower gardens, and we've expanded now to having tower gardens and an indoor program at all 5 schools, including the high school. And in elementary schools and middle schools, kids independently work on the tower gardens with their teachers under the guidance, under my direction. And then I come in and we do samplings. So our school garden program runs year round, even though we have harsh winters here. So when COVID hit in March, what we ended up doing, we'd started the seed starting part of the school gardens, but it was still too cold to do any outdoor gardens. But we had to pack up all of our tower gardens, and then I was able to distribute the seedlings, the lettuce seedlings, along with some tomato seedlings and pepper seedlings that I had grown with the help of an environmental club that I'm also the advisor of. So we have a really active environmental club, and with their help and with the approval of our county health department, we were able to distribute hundreds of seedlings in a very safe way to not just the students I would have been working with, first graders and third graders, but anyone who was interested in that as well. And then I also tried in March, there was interest from teachers. Teachers were very concerned, elementary school teachers were very concerned that their students would have something to do, and they were interested in gardening. There was a huge interest in gardening in general, I feel like, especially in this area, I imagine around the country. So I started making videos of seed starting and different ways to encourage home gardening that was specific to our zone. And I created a Google Classroom and sort of distributed information that way, which had a lot of interest initially, but I felt like as the school year went on, some of that dropped off a little bit. The summer program I was able to continue, again, with the approval of the school district and the county health department. That program was safe. It was pretty independent anyway. The way it has been structured for the last 10 years is that families come in 3 days a week to harvest on their own. So we recommended that they use hand sanitizer, and because no family was coming on the same day at the same time and very little tools are used beyond just a hose, that was pretty safe just as it was. So we were able to continue with that as we normally would. And then now this fall, with school starting, it became clear, and actually, John, if you wouldn't mind going to the next slide, actually, if I can go in reverse order. Okay, awesome, thank you. So I reached out before school started to the elementary school teachers that I would normally work with. I work with 5th grade teachers, and I asked them, what do you think, is this safe? You know, we started out the school year virtual, and our district is hoping to do some sort of hybrid in-person in October, but I don't know if anyone's seen in the news, La Crosse County, where we live, has hit the New York Times like highest COVID rates in the nation. So I'm doubting that's going to happen. But because it looked like either it was going to be all virtual this year or a back and forth model. It was going to be very difficult to have all of these tower guards spread out. And then I would have to go around to the tower gardens because I'm a one-person operation. So then that would be a challenge. And also if we did have in-person, just the nature of the way that our program is structured. Kids are, as you can see in the slide, they're right next to each other. They're sampling food, they're eating food in the classroom, and that would just be really challenging. So, again, with the approval of the school district, John, if you can go to the previous slide, I was able to get permission to take all of the tower gardens, the 6 ones in the district, to the high school. And here you see 3 volunteers are assembling them. I was able to do a little workaround. There's a lot of strictness about kids being on campus at all. Now there's a little more flexibility with school having started. But over the summer, I generally rely on a large quantity of high school kids to help me maintain the school gardens. It's one of the ways that we keep our program really inexpensive, as I get a lot of help from high school students. I work as a substitute teacher in the high school, so that's a great way to enlist some support and volunteers. And also with my environmental club, I'm able to get a lot of volunteers that way. Anyway, so we were able to take the tower gardens off-site, and the students were able to clean them, and then now we're able to put them on-site. And these are 3 of the 6 tower gardens that we'll put right in the main commons area of the school. Most teachers are doing Zoom lessons from the school. So the principal, who is a former ag teacher, he welcomes this opportunity to have these all together in the school, and feels like teachers seeing the bright lights and the tower gardens and the produce in there will be kind of a some ray of happiness, I guess. So, and all of the food then will go to, our district has a food pantry. They distribute food once a month. And they have, that has been in existence for many years. And then additional produce will go to our community local food pantry. I just couldn't see these tower gardens just sitting and being wasted. And I just couldn't see not using them as some sort of teaching tool. So although there's going to be only 6 kids that are really going to be maintaining these and learning from these, versus the hundreds of kids that normally would be benefiting from using the tower gardens. It's something, and we're doing something. So I'm not sure as far as the future of the outdoor program. I think we can do a lot virtually, and we can take the model that we use for the summer program, where families come in individually. We might be able to do something with that in the spring. So I guess it seems like every week there's a different thought. So I'm not even thinking too far ahead. Yeah, I think being flexible and being able to pivot is I think a helpful thing. So that's about it. If there's any questions.
I'm unmuting myself. Thank you very much, Jody, for sharing. It's a reminder, if there's a will, there's a way, or a modified way right now in COVID. And you reminded me of another point that we say a lot with our school administrators and principals that we're working with. They keep reminding us that we are building the plane as we're flying it. And it is so true. There are so many curveballs and figuring things out as we go. And I really appreciate you presenters for sharing how you're operating and pivoting to continue to do what you're doing. And what we're going to do now is open this up for everyone to share through a question tool that we use. We've used these in some of our last presentations. If you think about it, we have 70 plus folks on this call. And so how can we best create a note-taking document that's just not one big stream? And so we're going to use a tool called Padlet. Here's an example of a Padlet we used in the past. Up in the yellow box, the highlighted box, that's where category or topic ideas are listed for the Padlet we're going to be working on, which I'll give you the link to momentarily. The topic areas were generated through the questions that you posed. Some of them were grouped, and I'll go over what those are. When you use a Padlet, you look at the topic area first. If you have something to contribute or a question related, then you go down where the pink areas are noted. You either press the plus button on the bottom of the column, and that starts a whole new discussion area within that topic, or you can add a comment to something that someone else said. So for example, someone said something about cold weather, and if I was to add, oh, cold weather, run around outdoors to stay warm. If I wanted to add that, I would then hit add comment and continue the discussion area in that topic. One other thing about using Padlet, we would like you to, if you feel comfortable, leave your name, organization, and where you're based, because if you were to share a great nugget of information and someone wanted to track you down, that would be one way that they can do that. The Padlet is live and open all the time. And so when I share out the archived recording, this Padlet will also be accessible, so you'll be able to look at it and contribute to it in the future. So in the chat is the Padlet address, and here on the screen is the Padlet address. So I'm going to stop sharing here, find in the chat the Padlet address, and I'm going to review the categories that we came up with, or that you came up with, and that I categorized or grouped. So there was questions related to addressing food safety and liability. So how do you do this safely to cover your organization in terms of liability, especially now with COVID? Safe harvest and post handling of produce and distribution of produce during COVID. That was the #1 type of question that was asked. Connecting with special populations, for example, how do we get our food out to the rural communities? Or how do we connect to seniors if they're not digitally savvy? How do we communicate to them? That was a question someone had. Sharing food with schools, how do you do that? And then the last kind of grouping of categories was how to determine communities in need. So for example, your program might have a lot of food. How do you know who to provide it to, and how do you do that? So right now you can start pressing the plus signs underneath these categories if you want to start sharing resources or further questions related to these topic areas. And we'll just give you all about 5 minutes or so to add some discussion topics here. And then we'll come back as a group for the last 15 minutes or so, and we'll discuss these verbally, and you'll have an opportunity to raise your hand and share if you have specifics to share on these topics as well. This is where I need to learn how to put on background music. So if you're on the Padlet, you might notice that on the top of your screen, it says update. And if you hit the update, you'll see a refreshed thread of what folks are sharing. We'll give it just a couple more minutes and then we'll come in and discuss some of these categories. Someone asked how to add your name on the Padlet. You just type it in where you type in the comments that you're putting in there. If you log into Padlet, which is free, it will associate your name with a little icon. But putting your name and location is the most important because just your name on the top through your Padlet login doesn't let them understand where you're from. So we'll join back for Q&A verbally in a couple minutes. I did add a column. Someone suggested adding a column to the Padlet related to funding ideas to support programs during COVID. So on the far right, there's a new column that Mishiro Fraser suggested. So if you have anything to add there, that would be great. All right, well, I'm gonna refresh my screen to see kind of answers have been shared. And we'll just go from left to right, and participants, our panelists, if you have comments to share, please do. I'll kind of go through these columns and I'll share what I know related to the topics. And then if you all want to chime in and share, please do. And then also attendees, if you want to raise your Zoom hand, I could allow you to talk if you have a solution to add to the question topic. So for example, we'll start here with addressing food safety liability. I have heard other organizations say that they have more detailed liability forms to sign for using gardens in terms of produce pickup. I could see that being put into a liability form as well, so that you don't get sued for someone saying your kale caused COVID. Anybody else have anything related to addressing food safety liability? I like that someone said we have a protocol that they developed along with their county health. So and they offer trainings on that. So if you have a protocol and you follow that protocol, that's a COVID safe protocol. That is another way to cover your bases. All right, I'm gonna move over here to safe harvest post-handling during COVID. I think we covered that pretty well in the presentation when people were talking about masks, gloves, sanitation, and spacing. Does anyone else want to add anything outside of the masks, gloves, sanitation, and spacing? I'm looking through what people had to share here. Great. There's Colorado State Extension program was shared in the Grow and Give program, which talks about produce safe donations. So that seems like that could be a great resource, and Pam contributed that. Thank you, Pam, from Prairie Winds Elementary. All right, we'll keep on moving through our Q&A here. Connecting with rural or senior communities. So someone here mentioned they can't recommend enough connecting with your local community centers. And I would echo that your community centers are the folks that understand how to get in touch with people in need. And that relates to our fifth column over there, how to connect with communities in need. Most likely in your community, there will be an organization that knows who is food insecure. Often that is seniors. Sometimes that's rural communities. So connecting to those types of programs. I know here in Santa Cruz, we have a Meals on Wheels program, which continues to distribute food. We have a Food Not Bomb nonprofit. They contribute food to the, or Food Not Bombs, that's what it's called, and they contribute food to the homeless community. So most likely you will have an organization that you can connect with, whether it's a food bank or a community center. Someone else here mentioned WIC centers, women and infant care centers, and then of course senior centers. So some great ideas shared there in our thread. Does anyone else have any comments to share on connecting with rural or senior communities, or I'll expand this to how do we determine the communities and reach out to them that might need food relief?
I would just echo everything that's been said. We, at the beginning of COVID, reached out to organizations around the schools that we have teaching farms that do similar work, in doing food distribution of some sort. And just to see, can we partner? Would this be helpful? What are your needs? Who are you serving? How do you see this changing, or how have you seen this changing with COVID? And just starting those conversations. And then have found that, not trying to add or reinvent the wheel, but rather just support organizations that are already currently doing the work and have those relationships with kind of the end users has been most helpful and I think efficient for us. So.
Great. Well, a lot of this deals with communication, reaching out, finding organizations that are doing similar work and may have access to populations that you're not working with and that your food may serve those populations. I'm going to move on to the next one, sharing food with school classes. Many of you mentioned materials pickup. A lot of schools that are 100% virtual have scheduled times where materials are being picked up. Other schools are doing their school meal service the same way. I know that with the program we work with in the Pajaro Valley and the Watsonville area, we will distribute our materials for kids to pick up kits and lesson kits through the meal pickup sites and the materials pickup site. Each school is different. And we also have a program that distributes food bank produce. We have a really active food bank in our community. And in addition to the meal pickup sites for school meals, at times the food bank is distributing the produce that they have been collecting and need to get out because produce is perishable. So using these distribution systems already within the schools systems, it's a good way to do that. Anybody else have successes in sharing your food with classes?
We weren't sharing food with classes, but we did share seedlings with students in the spring. And I did actually try to reach out to, I reached out to our program that does the school lunch, passes out school lunches, and they preferred that we did not connect it with their school lunch distribution just to avoid additional contact with people beyond who was going there to receive their lunch. But we just coordinated it right after that drive up service. And then I was able to coordinate other services where I was able to ask teachers to advertise that we were giving out seedlings at such a time at their school, you know, at their bus pickup area. And so then as long as it was attended by me and then at a designated time and socially distanced, that was approved.
Great, and that's a great comment. Just to remind you, don't just show up at food distribution sites with a bag of produce and say like, hey, I want to give this away. It's obviously something that would need to be pre-communicated with your school food service and or school administrators when you're distributing materials, especially during this time of COVID. Wonderful. So we'll move on to the last column, the funding ideas. And I do want to just say that there are more dollars available related to how our government was able to put out emergency funds to support, you know, businesses, individuals, and schools. And I know that in our school district was able to receive funds, and they're using those funds to provide in-person experiences for the kids that they have identified that will not succeed in distance teaching, whether that's connectivity issues or their home and family life issues. So I know that those funds are being utilized to provide enrichment and support in school sites when all the other schools are doing distance teaching. So you could connect with your school district to see if they have requested or received any fundings to support needs related to COVID. And in the case of our organization, we are going to be working with our district and contracted to deliver enrichment and face-to-face programming with kids at school sites of those kids that are not available to succeed with distance teaching at home. So check with your school district. Someone here wrote Health and Human Services, hhs.gov. And then I would also like to mention that if you are an organization that receives money from an individual, you know, donor or a nonprofit, or excuse me, a grantor or a foundation, I know many of those organizations are being more lenient in terms of the way that they are letting their recipients of funds use those funds. So it's something to strike up a direct conversation with your funders if you're being funded by outside sources that are foundations or donors. Really strike up the conversation with them. We did have a webinar on this topic on funding and supporting your organization during COVID in the spring, and that might be a webinar you might want to check out because there were various ideas listed. Anybody else have anything to share? Want to raise your hand and share any funding resources that they've tapped into during this unique time?
I'll share a little bit. As the director of development, this is my primary concern every single morning. And we operate on a $1.8 million budget, employ 24 FTEs, and then also pay for all the maintenance at those 7 farms that we have. So, 80% of our funding goes towards salaries, which, as I'm sure many of you know, isn't always the easiest thing to seek funding for. So, I along with John, I'd recommend if you've already secured funding and you're finding that it no longer aligns with your funding needs, I've also found that funders and donors are more than happy to work with you. And I came from a community foundation prior to working at Jones Valley Teaching Farm. So I've been on both sides, and from the funders' perspective, I think, really you just want to know that your money is going to make an impact. And everyone, I think, is really understanding right now. So I wouldn't shy away from having those conversations. I also would encourage people to to proactively reach out to funders, whether it be United Way or your local community foundation or corporations, longstanding funding partners that you have, and just ask if there's COVID-specific funds. We have found, at least here in Birmingham, that a lot of corporate funders and foundations have designated a separate pot of money or have taken their typical grant dollars and have redesignated that for COVID purposes. And a lot of it is going to direct services, which food distribution falls often within that. So that's usually, one of the top 4 things that people are willing to fund. And then I think for us, it's been more thinking creatively about how we frame our budget. Typically, we've kind of shied away from thinking through, because we've been more educational focused, we've thought about kind of our manpower going towards delivery of education. But now, this food distribution is one of our more core deliverables, and is also something that the community really needs and funders want to fund. And so thinking through, how have we shifted our staff power to support this, and how does that reflect on our budget, and consequently then how much more money can we request to support this area of food growing and distribution. Hope that's helpful.
It was really great too to hear the flip perspective, being that you've worked from a community foundation. I do believe that right now funders just want good to happen, and if you're shifting from your original grant requirements, it's time to discuss, hey, things are changed, and it's completely obvious. My son hates it when I say this is unprecedented, so I don't use that word anymore. But we are in unique times. I want to close this out and thank all our presenters, Jody and Redding and Nicole and Jerome, for sharing the perspective of how they've adapted, but then they continue to get food out and grow food. We have a unique space as we're working with food and gardens. They open up so many avenues of community building and learning. And I thank you all for taking the time this afternoon or morning to learn a little bit more and continue the work as we move forward on these, I won't say unprecedented, these unique times. So thanks a lot for folks who joined on. You will be receiving an email that has an archive and a link to our Padlet. Thank you, folks. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, John.
Yeah, thank you all. Adios.
Thank you, John.
Thanks, Jerome.